everyone, and welcome back to Women Power Impact, a podcast where we talk about women doing impactful work through nonprofits and organizations. Today, we are chatting with Corinne Mamarella, a volunteer coordinator and organizer with Planned Parenthood of Western Pennsylvania. Corinne, go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Corinne. I'm the current organizer at Planned Parenthood of Western PA. I've been with the organization since spring of 2022, part-time, and then transitioned to full-time shortly after. Yeah.
Awesome. That actually leads us perfectly into our first question, which is what led you into the organization?
I came from a really rural, small town in Eastern PA, and I came to Pittsburgh, and it was my first time living in a more urban area. I love the services that Planned Parenthood provides. I love that they're unapologetically filling a gap in healthcare by providing services that are super stigmatized and politicized. So that's what initially drew me to them. In a small town, some of these services aren't accessible, and things like sex education aren't really, super normalized in those areas. Made me want to get involved with Planned Parenthood, and then I got an internship there, I think my sophomore year in college. When the organizing position opened, they reached out and I hopped back on board. So, yeah.
Awesome. And just to explain further, what do you do as a volunteer organization? What does your everyday work look like?
I do quite a bit in terms of organizing our supporters. When somebody wants to get involved with our affiliate in Western PA, they're funneled to me if they want to volunteer or share their story. I also talk to and manage the Planned Parenthood Generation Action chapters at Pitt and Chatham University. They're kind of like the Planned Parenthood clubs at those universities. I manage those organizations too. And then I also do some more political organizing. My job's kind of split between the Western PA affiliate, and I do a little bit of work for Planned Parenthood Pennsylvania advocates as well. When they have organizing work that they need done in Western PA, that's where I step in. Largely, I just manage our volunteers. That's pretty much what my day-to-day is. And then if we have a storytelling opportunity, I manage that too. So a lot of having people sign up for volunteer shifts, and I get them all set up and training volunteers and talking to patient storytellers about different efforts going on in that realm too.
Awesome. You mentioned a little bit about sex education and the services that Planned Parenthood provided, what drew you to it. So kind of, can you explain what Planned Parenthood does and the range of things it offers?
Yeah, for sure. We provide healthcare. At Planned Parenthood of Western PA, we have 6 health centers, 2 downtown, a family planning clinic and an abortion clinic downtown, and then downtown Pittsburgh. And then we have a clinic in Bridgeville, Moon, Johnstown, and Greensburg, and all of them provide family planning services. So I think that spans over like 25 or 26 counties. The healthcare we provide includes abortions, gynecological care, STI testing and treatment, birth control, cancer screenings, gender-affirming care. And it's also important to note that we're one of 2 independent abortion clinics in Western PA. There's a Planned Parenthood of Western PA and Allegheny Reproductive Health Center in East Liberty. That's the healthcare side of what we do. We try to make our services very affordable by accepting most insurances and providing flat fee scales for uninsured patients. In addition to that, like you mentioned, we provide a lot through our education department in terms of education initiatives. They teach comprehensive sex ed in Pittsburgh public schools, which is really awesome. And they facilitate safe spaces for LGBTQIA plus youth. They also provide community education. And we have an HIV program coordinator now. So we have HIV programming, which is awesome. And then kind of the third prong of what we do is advocacy, which is where I come in. We work to advocate for the services and the education that we provide. So yeah, we just bring awareness to these things and work to debunk the stigma around them as well.
Awesome. And so how can people in the community support these efforts? You said you take volunteers, so that's one way, but is there anything else people can do?
Yes, you can sign up to volunteer. There's quite a few volunteer roles. We have opportunities in the medical clinic working with patients and staff to help the flow of everything. We see tons of patients. So any help we get there making everything run a little smoother is super helpful. And then we also have volunteers who help walk our patients to the door past any anti-abortion demonstrators who stand outside our clinic. That's really important in terms of promoting accessibility to abortion care. A lot of patients may be intimidated to even just walk in our doors. So those volunteers really help to bridge that gap. And then, volunteers just kind of generally help out with whatever else we have going on. But those are two bigger volunteer roles right now. People can also get involved through storytelling, sharing their stories. That can come in quite a few different forms. If you want to share your story verbally, we can provide opportunities for, different interviews, media outlets, press opportunities, rallies, many speaking events we can get you plugged into. You can share your story in written form utilized for different campaigns we have going on, whether on social media or, printed out physical copies of people's stories. All of those stories can be used to reduce stigma around sexual and reproductive health care and bolster understanding and, empathy for patients who want to share and be vulnerable about the services they obtained. People can get involved through either of those ways. Honestly, with sharing your story, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can just be answering the question, why does Planned Parenthood matter to you? Or why do you care about sexual and reproductive health care? Even if it's one sentence, like that can be super helpful. It doesn't always have to be a super emotional story. That's why we are working to reduce stigma around it, because there doesn't always need to be a reason. It's just healthcare. Stories are what we're trying to focus on recently in terms of bolstering that program. People can also get involved through joining a local Generation Action chapter. Maybe at, if you go to Chatham or Pitt, those chapters are doing amazing work very locally in their college communities. They really work objectively to see what gaps there are in sexual and reproductive health care in their colleges. I know Pitt does a lot of work around Plan B access. They do fun events tailored to college-age people, which is awesome. People can also get involved if you don't have capacity for that. You can just get on our newsletter so that you're informed about these issues. You could also donate if you want to do that. There's a couple of funds like the Vivian Campbell Fund and the Western PA Fund for Choice. Both go to abortion patients to help cover the cost of, whatever they need help with. And then we have it's called Pledge a Picketer Fund at Planned Parenthood of Western PA. You can sponsor an anti-abortion protester who stands outside of our door. So if we get for example, 50 protesters in a month and you donate a cent per protester, then you're donating 50 cents so a month, which is, pretty awesome. And yeah, I would say if you want to get involved through volunteering or sharing your story, that's great. Just trying to stay informed as much as you can, following us on social media, joining our newsletter are honestly super important as well.
Those are excellent ways, and I think that would be perfect for the audience. Even just outside of Planned Parenthood, how do you see the next generation of girls, young women, others impacted by restrictions on reproductive freedom taking action, especially in states and areas where Planned Parenthood or reproductive freedom isn't as distributed?
Yeah, that's a great question. How am I seeing it now, or how do I hope to see it?
Both.
Oh, okay. I think right now we're seeing a lot of movements in the reproductive health, rights, justice spheres being really amplified by social media. There is tons of phone banking, not just locally, but on a national. The fact that people in Pennsylvania can take action to help other communities that they don't even interact with, I think is really awesome. I think that's where our generation is really stepping in, because we're super social media literate. We're great at resource sharing on social media. I think that's a powerful tool we're starting to harness in a targeted way, which is great. That's where the movement has gone, which is awesome. But at the same time, I also see people taking action hyper-locally, not just on their phones, not just through social media. There's tons of work going on in Pittsburgh now, tons of fundraisers for Western PA Fund for Choice and the Vivian Campbell Fund, like I was mentioning, spearheaded by activists, many of whom are young activists. So I think that the younger generation, we're really seeing that this is going to be an uphill battle more than we may have initially thought when we came into these spaces. I think that's at least what I've been seeing from my perspective, that people are taking effort however they can, whether through social media or in person, and realizing that no effort is too small. Just like I think the phone banking for Florida is a great example. Like the fact that some people might have hopped on a phone bank and called 10 people, maybe talked to one person, but that one person's, may have been educated about an issue they never even knew about. So it's really power building in maybe less conventional ways, but I think they're imperative for the long-lasting movement. Honestly, with PPGen too, the college chapters, I think that's also something I've been seeing with the movement. Those college chapters are really tailoring their advocacy experiences to what fits them and their communities. They're doing things that are just really helping to fill their own cups. They're not just burning themselves out. They're doing amazing work and it's tiring, but they're also recognizing that we need to fill our own cups too, because we can't pour from an empty cup. So they do things like, sometimes they have meetings that are just like self-care meetings and like, let's study together rather than just let's constantly fight all the time to work to better our campus. That they recognize that through bettering themselves too, they're bettering their campus. And I think that's super admirable and maybe something that, previous generations that hasn't been super built into their advocacy work before. But that's what I've been seeing there. And I guess what I hope to see is a continuation of that. When you start with yourself in your advocacy journey, you're inherently more powerful. What do you care about in this fight specifically? What are you doing to stay informed? A lot of that is accountability, checking in with yourself and saying, why am I here? I think that can really help with burnout if you have motivation and a true purpose behind existing in advocacy spaces. I think that you're just more inclined to enjoy your time there. I like the saying, think globally, act locally, never forgetting about the big picture, but also never forgetting about the people around you where your feet are. You may think that you can't make a lot of change in the world with constant and ever-changing movements, but if you're impacting, yourself and just a couple people around you, then you are making change. And that's super important because who else is going to do it if not you?
Yeah, I really like that. And it's actually funny because we did an interview with another organization, Sojourner House, and they do recovery help for mothers. The lady I talked to from that organization was also like, our organization seems small and the people aren't with us for a long time, but we can have massive impacts on their life. So I really like the idea. And I said this to her as well, but of just like small impacts that we often underestimate, but can like do really big things. So I like that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was just going to
go ahead. Yeah.
In interacting with my volunteer base and seeing the program grow over my time here, I've really wanted to take action, which has been so amazing. People may not think that walking a patient to the door of the clinic is making a big difference, or they might not think that sitting at the front desk of our clinic and checking patients in is making a difference, but it's freeing up so much time to provide care. The feedback we've gotten from patients about volunteers is just incredible. Literally has been the difference between them entering for their appointment and not, because they were so intimidated by the protesters. So you may not think that the work you're doing seems super impactful, but for your world and for that person's world and for the space you're inhabiting, you're literally making a difference. So I like to tell my volunteers, thank you just so much for even being here. Like, you wanted to take action and you did, and you're making a difference by just being in this space and trying to make a difference.
I really like that. And I think it's much more important to do something than nothing, like literally anything. Has your perspective related to the work you do, whether it's basic volunteering or the stories you hear, changed your perspective on anything?
Yeah, for sure. I think that for the healthcare we provide specifically, growing up in a very rural area where these were super stigmatized services, I've had some stigmas myself that I've been socialized into about sexual and reproductive health care. But just seeing the amount of people that are just like, there does not need to be a reason. There can be a reason, but there does not need to be a reason for even abortion care specifically. Like, it is a part of healthcare. People have made it seem very nuanced, but in my opinion, it really, at this point, isn't. It's just something that is different per person. There are so many different reasons. There doesn't have to be a reason. Like, there is, in my opinion, literally no way to regulate it because it's part of healthcare. So I think that has just become more clear for me too. Like, the fact that there are attempts at legislating it and regulating it it's a little bit mind-blowing. In my organizing world, I've seen a lot of people want to take action and feel like maybe they're not doing enough. It's really the case. Just showing up is doing so much. And I think that we're just so grateful. The reproductive freedom movement started with volunteers, and our clinic downtown in Pittsburgh was at one point run by volunteers. I think people may forget that activism in general is super volunteer run. I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, that you're part of this, you're making a difference, you're making an impact.
I really like that. In this vein of just taking action, we touched on how people impacted by the restrictions can take action. How do you see people that it doesn't directly impact, but perhaps people don't have the ability to get pregnant? How do you see them taking action? Because it affects them slightly differently, but it still does. How do you see them joining the fight to support the people around them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Abortion and deciding when and how to reproduce and bring children into the world literally affects everyone. It affects the people you're around. It affects yourself, your friends and family, and your community on a macro scale. It affects larger community. To say it doesn't affect you, like, it literally affects everyone. And I think that when people show who don't think that they're affected by it, learn that they are, and then decide to take action, it's one of the most validating things for the people who are affected by it. When I see a cis white male volunteer coming into the Planned Parenthood space and stepping up, I think that's amazing. It shows that this fight affects everyone. It's super important to use your privilege to help support the people who have been doing the work. If you are on the fence about taking action because you think it doesn't affect you, first educate yourself about how it does affect you. Show solidarity, show support for the people in the fight, and take action.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but how does Planned Parenthood, like the organization itself, fit into a larger narrative for reproductive freedom, like in the United States, but also globally?
Yeah, so Planned Parenthood falls within the reproductive freedom movement. The reproductive freedom movement is kind of like three-pronged. There's reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice. And we kind of work in the rights and health parts of it. So, of course, we provide as much as we can comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care. And then we, through reproductive rights, work to advocate for those services. But then reproductive justice was created by and for Black women. We support and partner with organizations doing that work, like New Voices for Reproductive Justice in Pittsburgh. Reproductive justice talks about autonomy, having power over choosing to have children, parenting the children you have in safe and sustainable communities, and just making sure everybody that has the resources to do that, and recognizing that that can only be achieved through racial justice. So just want to acknowledge that Planned Parenthood did not form reproductive justice, but we support that work and uplift that work. We perform reproductive health care and rights within the reproductive freedom movement. And I think nationally, now we're working to just really continue that. We're seeing that healthcare and rights are really under attack, and on a larger scale, I think we're really working to ensure that the access states remain access states. Like PI is considered an access state for the surrounding areas. So just really making sure that our health centers are prepared for those patients that we see from out of state. And then just working constantly on a state level and national level to be vigilant in tracking anti-abortion legislation, trying to educate our supporters about that legislation. It's super important to stay informed about current, proposed, past, future attacks on sexual and reproductive health care because it's constant. But I think education is power, and knowing about these things is super powerful because it can be as simple as signing a petition to help us in these fights. Something else we're really trying to do is making lobbying more accessible, because at the end of the day, these legislators work for us. We're taxpayers. So I think that it's important that we know that we are welcome in these advocacy spaces with lobbying and stuff. Sometimes Planned Parenthoods on the state level have lobby days, and we happily invite our supporters to those. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'm glad you explained the whole thing, because I think that like even I was confused in the beginning, like when you made the distinction between reproductive justice and rights for then those kinds of things. I'm really happy for the explanation. And one of the things you mentioned, which is like the attacks are constant. So how do you, because you work in the sphere of advocacy, how do the people around you, how do you see people like recovering from the constant blows? Like kind of mentioned self-care before, but how do you keep going? Because it's a marathon, attacks keep happening. So how do you see us working around those and continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning because it's really tough also. But I think that in the sexual and reproductive health care sphere, we recognize that this movement impacts other movements, and it's kind of this huge web of trying to work towards freedom in every aspect of that. The constant attacks can make us feel lonely or like there's less of us than there actually is. But no one's alone in this. There are people who feel the same way as you. And in the states where abortion was even on the ballot, it persevered. We got to take the things where we can. Maybe it feels like it's constant losses, but there's a ton of gray area. It's not totally black or white. The fight isn't linear. I think that if you're feeling lonely, just know that there are other people who are sharing your thoughts and are right there with you. But it feels lonely by design. They want us to feel like there are less of us than there actually are. So I think that finding community wherever you can is really important. Also, being grounded in your intuition is really good. You'll know when the fight is becoming too much for you or when you are feeling compelled to take action. You'll know when you're feeling burnout. You'll know what's affirming for you. So I think through self-care can really come a cultivation of your intuition. And I think that that's like following that is really kind of imperative always, but just, in advocacy fights too. And then just kind of with that, like advocacy and service work has been dominated by women, queer women, people of color. But we don't want to recycle the like capitalistic systems that have come out of the patriarchy that make us feel burnout. So if we are feeling really burnout, maybe take a step back and breathe. Are we repeating that same way of operating that we're trying to fight against? I hope that makes sense. But constantly reevaluating and checking in with yourself is really important for sustainability within the fight.
I really like that last part, that it's so easy to fall into the capitalistic patriarchal mindset that we've all like grown up in. The world is still like that. And I think, like taking a step back and being like, knowing when, I think that's the best thing. And I actually really like that. I guess that kind of segues perfectly into usually what we wrap up with is throughout your life, the work that you've done, the things that you've seen, what piece of advice do you have for young women today to navigate the world as they go into the future?
I think it would be to trust your intuition, trust your gut. Honestly, that for me is all encompassing. You know yourself best. You know what fuels you. taking yourself and your wholeness into whatever you're doing is receiving for helping yourself navigate the future. It's a big, scary, ever-changing world. And I think we really need to be rooted in ourselves and in our communities right now more than ever. And I think that'll continue in the future. Like, it's going to be more of an uphill battle than we thought it was going to be in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it's always been that uphill. So trusting yourself, trusting your support systems, leaning into them when you need to is going to be pretty imperative and may help us build better, more sustainable communities than were previously there. Yeah.
I really like that. Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you for everything that you shared. It was absolutely eye-opening and fascinating because I don't think we hear too much about this. People my age pay attention to it, but not as much as we should. It was really nice to talk to you. And that wraps up our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you back soon for the next episode of Women Power Impact.